Okay, now tell me, what is a class? Now, we have been declaring Java classes, no? What is a Java class? If someone asks, this is how you create a class using the class keyword, class test, and then you use the square bracket, curly brackets. So, right now, here this is a Java class. Okay, inside this class, what can you have?
Attributes and
yes, you can have attributes. That means you can have variables. Simply, you can have variables and
methods.
methods. Exactly. You can have variables and the methods. Right. Now, so far now we know how to use the methods. Sorry, how to use the variables, and then we have dealt with the operations of the variables as well. Right. Now, let's say now, okay, here, now in the same file, now I'm going to declare two classes, right? Now here, I'm going to declare a class called student, right? And a class called test, right? If you want, you could do it in a separate file. Okay, let's do it in a separate file, right? Doesn't matter, you can do it in a same file unless if it is not a public class, you could do it, right? Okay, in the student class here, I'm gonna have some variables saying string name, and I'm gonna have integer student ID, name ID, and then the address. Right. Now this is what you call as the variables you have declared. Now the student class has only these attributes of the variables. Right. Now let me save this as well. In the desktop, I'm going to create a folder called EX. Inside the EX, I'm going to name it as student.java. And here is the student class. Then I'm going to have another one called a test class. Right now in the test class, now I want to create. Now I want to access. Now you know how to access the scanner class in order to get inputs. Now you know how to create an object likewise. Here likewise, I want to try create an object of the student class from the test class. That means I'm going to declare a main method to the test class. Right. Now here this comes with a method now. And specific method, you know, that which can start the execution of the class as well. Otherwise, now student class cannot run. Right. We'll try that as well. Okay. Right. Now, here I will leave it aside. Now this the student class has saved. Let's try to run the student class. Inside the desktop, inside the EX folder, I have the student class. Now, when I try to run this, compile this, okay, it could compile. Now, when I try to run this, it will give you an error saying main method not found. Therefore, the driver is not there. Therefore, without the main method, you cannot run, you cannot execute the student class, because student class we have not declared the main method. Therefore, it cannot run by itself. Right, now let's create the test class, and from the test class we will access the student class. In order to do that, we could say student s, you can have stu, you can have object name, like now this is the variable, you can see the variable type, variable name, and then we need to create a new object. Therefore, we're going to use the new keyword to create a new instance, and then we need to initialize it. Therefore, we're going to call the constructor of the student class. Right. Now, thereafter, now we have created an object from the student class called stu. Now, remember, now this object has the access, or it has own copy of name, ID, address variables. Now, for these three variables, we're going to call it as instance variables. Now, remember this. Instance variable. Why we call it as instance variables? Because these variables are declared inside a class but outside any method. Inside a class, outside any method. This therefore we call it as an instance variable. And also remember, when you create an object of a particular class, then that class, all the instance variables get assigned the default values. Right now, here we have not assigned any value, name, ID, address, we haven't assigned any values. Therefore, let's try out what are the values available here. Right now, try out this. You could print. Now, how to access the name variable? Just easy. We could say stu.name. stu.sid and stu.address. Right, now let me save the test class as well. Test.java. Right, now let's compile the test class. Now this is how you compile. Now let's run this. Now you can see in the name become null, ID becomes 0, address become null. Now now I said that when you create an object or when you create an instance of the student class, right? Now this object has its own copy of name, ID, and address variables, because these three are the instance variables. And then when you create an object, that means there is something called the constructor. Now, what is the constructor? Now, here you can see we are calling the class name student, and it's like a method, two brackets. Now, this is what you call as a constructor. Now, we are calling the constructor of the student class. And when you call the constructor, remember, write down the default constructor. Now, because in the student class, now you might think, okay, what he's talking. Now there's nothing, no. There's nothing like student, right? No, there is nothing. You can't see anything declared like student with the empty brackets, no, right? Therefore, what happens here is when you compile the student class, not only the student class, every class, when you compile every class, if the if the constructor is not defined, then the default constructor will generate. The default constructor will get generated. Then the purpose of the constructor. Purpose of the constructor. Now, purpose of the constructor means, right, to assign values to the instance variables. Now, to assign initial values. Right now, let me show you that. Now here I'm gonna this one you can see we are calling this one, right? But actually we have not declared it here. But even though the default constructor is there, therefore it will assign default values to the instance variables. Right, now let me declare the constructor. Now this is the constructor. Now the difference between a constructor and a method is constructor does not have a return type and it has the same name as the class name, constructor. Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to display constructor executed. I'm going to display constructor executed. Let's see. Now you can see when I try to create an object. Now in the test class here we call this. Now let's say I'm not going to print these things. For the time being now these are null. Right now these values are not available now. Right. Now here I'm just creating an object. Now, when I'm creating an object of the student class, now when I compile this and when I run this, you will see it says constructor executed. Now, what is this? Okay, this is the constructor because we have declared the constructor. Therefore, now the compiler no need to generate a default constructor because we have defined the constructor. We have done the constructor. Therefore, now no default constructions will not get generated, and even if you try the values, now the values would be the default values. Now the constructor will assign, if the values are not assigned there, it will assign the default values. It will assign the default values. Right now, if I compile this and if I run this, now you can say the name null because string variables null, integer variables 0, it assigns. Right. Now, if I want, now I can assign values in the constructor as well. In the constructor, I can say name John. SID equals 101. And address BMB. Right. Now I'm going to assign values inside the constructor. Right. Right. Now when I run this, now you can see it gives me John 101 CA. Right. Because now what happens here is now in the constructor I am hard coding values. Right, now let's try out. I'm going to create another object S1 and S2. Here this is S1.name. S1.sid. Let's add the right. Okay, now we have this Alright, S1 objects it will print. Yeah, I'm going to print S2 details. And now what happens here is now no matter how many objects you create, now all the objects will get assigned the same values. Because why? The constructor I'm assigning John 101 CAP. Therefore, even if you create 1,000 objects, each object will have its own. That means its own copy of each object have its own copy of these variables, because S1 has its own copy of name, ID, address, and S2 has its own copy of name, ID, address, but here it will display. Right now it will get assigned John 101 CAB, because in the constructor we have defined to assign this. Therefore, default values would be this now. Right, okay. Quickly try out the constructor thing, and thereafter we'll have a parameterized constructors. Now, let's say now the problem here is now no matter how many objects you create, each object now these values get hard coded. And when you have not declared this, what happens is now the Java constructor will create the default constructor and then assign the default values. Now, even if you have not assigned the values, then the same thing will happen. Even this constructor will assign the value instance variables to the default values. And now what I want to do now is when I pass some values, Now let's say when I create an object, I want to pass the values. Now as a user, when I'm creating an object, I want to pass the values. Therefore, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to declare, let's say, name n and integer id and string address. Right. Okay, now what I'm going to do is here for the name variable, I'm going to assign the n. For the ID variable, I'm going to assign the ID. For the address variable, I'm going to assign the address value. Right. Because these are the parameters now I have declared. Right. Since we have declared the parameters, now we need to, when you are calling this, we need to pass the values because we can't call the default constructor now. Why? Because default constructor has been override. We have defined the constructor with parameters. Therefore, now if you want, now if you try this, now this will give you an error saying, right now we are not passing the arguments because the constructor is defined to accept now with parameters. Therefore, it is expecting arguments. Therefore, you need to pass the arguments. Now you will get the error saying actual and formal argument list differ. Actual argument, now this is the parameters. That means we have to pass string ID, string integer string. Then if you are not passing, it will give you an error. Therefore, now let's say here I'm going to say John and 101 and LK. Let's say and 102. I'm going to say UK. Right. Now I have passed the values. Now you can see it got compiled. Now when I run, it gives me two different values. Now, because at the time it create the instance. At the time it create the instance. Now we are passing. Okay, these are the values we need to assign to this object we're going to create. That means this object name, ID, address should be these values we have passed it. Right. Okay. Quickly try out this as well. Right. Now remember, now this has to be the exact order because it is expecting a string value, then integer value, then string value. Then you need to pass string int string. Okay. Try changing the values and also try out. Right, now the next problem is, now when you right now here we now here we have passed now different values, no? Then if I want to use the same name as this, try out this. Now the variable names in the parameters also I want to have the same, right? Now here I want to assign here. Now there's a problem now. The previously SID and ID are two different variables, no? Therefore, what we want to do is ID variable value to the SID. But now the parameter variables also the same name SID address. Instance variables also the same name. Right now, which value got assigned to what? That I don't know. Let's try out and tell me what happens here when you do it like this. What happens here when you do it like this? Try out. Now, what happens now? Yes, now what happens is, now here now these variables now I said now these name ID address created inside the class but outside any method. Now these as the instance variables. Now here these variables now. Now you can say these are parameters or parameter variables, or you can say in other names local variables. Now these are local variables. Right now, here at this context. Now name means to this local, if you refer name means this local variable. Therefore, the name value get assigned to the name. Now that won't get assigned to this instance variable. Now the requirement is to assign the value of the local variable to the instance variable. Therefore, we need to refer to the instance variable. Therefore, we need to type this dot. Okay, now without doing this, if you compile, now you can see the values won't pass to this instance variables right now, because here it will display null and 0, because why? The constructor is not assigning value to the instance variables. Right, therefore here what happens is, now this name also refers to this name variable. Therefore, this local variables we are referring. Since we need to refer to the instance variable, we need to use the keyword this. We need to use the keyword this. With this keyword, now this dot name refers to the here the name variable. Right. Now if you try out, now you can see here it would display with the values. Right. You try out this. Right. Okay, now let's say now we know how to create the constructor and what is the purpose of the constructor, and then how to pass the parameters to the constructor, that we know. Right, now remember, now by looking at this code, you'd understand now each object you create has its own copy of each object has its own copy of instance variable. Now, when you create S1 object has name, ID, address, and S2 has a separate copy of name, ID, address. Therefore, each object has its own copy of instance variables. Right. Now remember that. Okay, then right. Now how to declare a method. Now we know how to declare a constructor. Let's say in the student class, I want to return have a method. Now inside a class, we can have methods and variables, right? Now the method has to have a return type. Therefore, here I'm going to declare no return type. Void say hello. Now you can see here the constructor and the method is the same. Constructor has a name, method has a name, but constructor has the same name as the class name. Constructor does not have a return type, but method has a return type. Now these are the differences. Now I want to display student says hello. The student means the name. We can use name variable plus says hello. And if I want to return, now I want to return a string value. I want to return string get data. Get data. Let's say get info, get student. Right, if I'm going to declare another method called get student. Right now, this is going to return. Now, this is going to return the student details. That's going to return the student details. Right now, here I'm going to write return. Here it has to return the student name. It has to return name, ID, name, ID, and the address. It's going to return a string value. It's going to return a string. Now it's going to return a string. Now in the test class, right? Now you can display, you can call the method, right? S1 dot say hello. You can say S1 dot say hello. And you can call, because we have the object S2 also have the access to say hello method. And S1 has the access to the get student method. S1 dot get student method. But the problem here is there's a problem now. The get student method is returning a string value. Therefore, that value we need to either, let's say, a string result or something like, we need to get the value because it is returning values. Then we could print using, we can print using a system.out.println, or else we could do the same task inside the system.out.println. S2 dot say hello, S2 dot get student. And now you can see here we could access using the object name dot. Likewise, also you could access the instance variables and you could change the values as well. And then here, this is how you access the methods. This is how you call the methods. Right now, Right, let's compile. Now what it says is student get student. Right. What is the error? Cannot find similar. Right, we might have not saved it. Okay, we haven't saved. Right now you can see. Now when you print, it says construct executed because at the first line, it's gonna get execute the constructor. Second line, when you create in the object, it says construct executed. And when you say s1 dot say hello, it says John says hello. And then when you call the get student method, it returns the details of the student, John 101 LK. Likewise, this displays. Right now, thereafter, now let's say I want to change the values. Now we have already assigned. Right now, I'm going to change the values. Here, I'm going to say s1 dot name equals will, and I'm going to change s1 dot age into 35, and I'm going to say s1 dot address into VME. Right. Now I'm going to change the values. Now using the dot operator, you could change the values as well. Right now here using this method, you can print it, or else if you want, you can call the s1 dot say hello method. Get student method. Now get student method will return the same values. Right now, and also I'm going to do it for the s2 as well. Object2 dot name and Jane. Right. What age 35? Age 25. Not age, we have a side, you know. Right, now you can see the previously displays different set of values, but now after changing this, now it would display Jane 25 and likewise. Now the same thing we would be able to see if you call right now if you call the get student method thereafter. Now here for the S1 object names, age, address, after doing this will get updated. Okay, try out this. And after doing this, create a class called calculator, right? And define methods called declare a variable called result, a double variable, and then have a method called add and subtraction, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Have the methods. Right now, if you want, you can declare the right. Okay. Let's declare the number one, that means x, y, and the results variables. And then you need to create the constructor, and thereafter do these values: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and the modulus. Right. Okay. Quickly do it. Okay, have you finished? Okay, have you tried this, the calculator class? Jonathan, have you done it?
Yes, sir. I'm nearly done it. I have to create division and modulus.
Okay, quickly complete and send me the code via chat, Andrea and Kumutsu as well. Right. Okay. One of you have sent me the answer. Right. The class calendar. The main method, the driver class as well.
Sorry, sir.
The driver class.
Uh,
Right. Okay. Right now, there is no point of having the results variable, no?
oh,
Right now because you are just returning the value. It's right. Right. Then we can quickly go through this. Right now, we know what is an object. Now, object has states and behaviors. Right now, in the student class, we had the states like student name, student ID, and the address. Those were the states, and the behaviors for say hello and get student data. Those were the methods we declared, and those were the behaviors. Right? Therefore, object is an instance of a class. Therefore, we declare what are the states and what are the behaviors of a object when you are when you are defining the class. When you are defining the class, we decide that. Right. And then we can say the object is an instance of a class, and then class is a template, or class is a blueprint, class we use to define the states and the behaviors, or the variables and methods for objects it can have. And a class can have multiple objects, not only one object. A class can have any number of objects. Class can have any number of objects. Right. And inside a class, you can have variables and methods. If you have only variables, then we can call it as a data-only class. Right? And the variables declared inside the class, outside any method, we call it as a instance variables. We call it as an instance variables. Right. Then in order to create an object, we are following a few steps. Those were like declaration, instantiation, and initialization. Declaration, we discussed that student. Right now, when you type student s1 equals student s1 equals new student. When you type like this, now student s1, right now this is the variable declaration. Now this is what the variable declaration. And then you instantiate. Now in order to create an object, you use the keyword new. And then in order to initialize the new object created, we call the constructor student. And now this is the default constructor. Right? If you have parameterized constructors like the one we have now in the student class, you need to pass the arguments. Right? If you do not declare the constructor, then that would be the default constructor. Right. And then in order to create an object, we use student s1 equals new student. And remember, each time when you create an instance of a class, you are creating an object which contains its own copy of all the instance variables defined in the class. Now that's why the name, ID, and the address, right, both s1 object and the s2 object has its own copy of name, ID, and the address values. Therefore, every object you create has its own set of instance variables declared in the class. Right, remember that. Okay, then, right, once you create the object using the dot operator, object name dot, you could access the instance variables as well as if there is any methods you have declared, you could access. Right now, for an example, if you can s1.name, s1.sid, s1.address, likewise, we have access the using the dot operator. Right now, here, what it would display? What do you think? What would be the output of this class? What would be the output?
Attributes of minivan.
It says that minivan can carry 7 passengers with a range of what? What is the range? Fuel capacity into minus 16 into 21. With that, it will give you the answer. Right. Now, when you are creating an object, now we use the reference variable. That means when you're creating an object, you say student s1 equals new student. Now here vehicle minivan equals new vehicle. Now vehicle minivan, that means you have declared variable to refer the object. Now therefore we call it as a reference variable. Now we can call it as a reference. We have created a reference to the object. Now in order to access the object, we have created a reference. Right. Now, if you use, let me see. Right. Now let's say now here we have the account class student name and the ID only we have, let's say, and name and the ID only. And I'll say hello method we have. Right, now I'm going to create another variable called student type variable called s3 equals s1. Now for this one also I'm going to have the same value. John 101, 101. Right now, the student details will print student say hello method. Let's say we have method called info. What it does is it display name, name plus SID plus S1 dot info. I'm gonna call S1 dot info. S2 dot info, S3 dot info. Right. Okay, what should be the output now? Okay, that's a combo. Right. Now you can see when I run this, now all the objects S1, S2, and S3 refers to the same object. Right. Now it's not the same object. Sorry, it will display the same values. Now what happens actually here is S1 has its own copy of instance variables. S2 has its own copy of instance variables. S3 also will have its own copy of instance variable. Now, since S3 is referring to what S1 object refers, S3 is referring to what S1 is referring. Right, therefore, now what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to change S3 dot name S3 dot name as and S3 dot SID as 300. Right. Now my question is, now S1 dot info, what would be the S1 dot info value? What would be the S2 dot info value? And what would be the S3 dot info value? Okay, quickly figure out if you can try, first think what it's gonna be. What would be the output?
S3 and S1 is same.
Both will be the same. All will be the same, is it? Sorry, let's compile and let's run. Now you can see, now what happens? Now can anyone tell me why S1 and S3 gives me this are like same values and
Because they are pointing to the same memory location.
yes, because S1, what happens is now for an example, here let's say we have the S1 object here in the memory. Right now, let's say this is the reference. Okay, sorry. And yes, let's say now this is the S1 object we are referring now, that is referred by S1. Now what I'm doing is S2, I'm creating a new object and I'm creating a new object in the memory. And when I say S3, S3 is equals to S1. What happens is S3 also changes to what S1 refers. S3 refers to what S1 refers. Therefore, only the reference get updated, no object get created there. S3 is referring to what S1 is referring. Now that's why when you change S3 dot name and S3 dot ID, that means S3 is referring to this object, S1 also is referring to this subject. Now that is why here, now we got S1 dot name and S3 dot name and. Like, is that clear? Okay, try out this. And there is a method called, okay, try check whether S1 equals 2 equals and S2 what it refers. And there is a method called equals S1 dot equals. Just check S1 dot equals S2 and S1 dot equals S3. Likewise, check whether what this returns. Right. Now what happens here is right. Okay. Right. Now variables, you know that variables means if it is a local variable which is defined inside a method or constructor or inside the blocks or inside the for loops, we call it as a local variables. Therefore, remember, if it is a local variable, we have to uh, initialize it before use. Right now, for an example, let's say now inside this info, I have right now a variable called count, integer count, and I'm just going to display the count variable here. If I try to use the count variable, and then if I compile this, now you will see, okay, variable declaration. Right now you can see a variable count might not have been initialized. Therefore, if you want to use it, you need to initialize it. But because the instance variables, you don't have to initialize it. Why? The constructor by default assign the default values to the instance variables. Now this is a local variable. Now you can set it as a local variable. Right. Remember, if it is a local variable, you must initialize before use it. If it is a local variable, you must initialize before use it. Right now it gets compiled because if it is a local variable, you must initialize before use it. Right. Okay, that's the difference between our local variable and the instance variables. And local variables defined inside methods, inside a class, inside a method must initialize. And the local variables scope will be only enters when the that particular method gets start executing, and once the method finish, the local variable get destroyed. If it is an instance variable inside a class, outside a method, therefore these are initialized when the class is instantiated, that means from the constructor, and can be accessed from the inside any method. Right now this will be available until the class is finished. Right. Then methods, you know that method is right now the variables is to store values temporarily. We declare variables to store values. Now in other terms, we can say to define states or like of an object, we use the methods. Right now, if you want to define the behaviors, what each object can do, what object can perform, now that is defined by declaring methods inside the class. Right now, if it is a method, now normally we declare methods to perform only one particular task, and every method has a name. Using the name, we can invoke the method, and method has a return type. Now method has a return type, whether it may return or may not return anything. If it is not returning, it's going to be void. If it is returning anything, the return type is going to be the type of the values it returns. And we already know about the main method. Main method is a specific method or the very special method, which is which start the execution of the class, and main method is also type of a method, and that is a reserved one. that starts the execution of the class, and the method is over, it will stop the program as well. Right, now we can't use, when you are declaring the methods, we can't use the Java keywords as the method names. Right. Right now, when you are declaring a method, you use the round brackets after the method name in order to specify that as a method. And also, if there is any parameters, then we're gonna declare it inside the round brackets. And after the method, the scope of the method is defined by using the curly brackets. Right. Now here we have, I asked you to declare some methods as well. Right now, let's declare one more method. Let's say, oh,